What is up, guys? I'm back, and we're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Thompson versus Holland. And in case you haven't noticed, I am recovering a little bit from an illness. Nose is still a bit stuffy, but beyond that, I'm feeling pretty good. But that is neither here nor there. We're breaking down Thompson versus Holland, a very exciting card here. This fight's actually going to take place in Orlando, Florida, so we have a live crowd here. This is definitely one of the better Fight Night cards, and the fact that this is going to be in an arena, I think, is going to make it even better. I do feel that fighters, especially if they've gone a long time without fighting in an arena, if they've only had like Apex fights lately, they do tend to bring the action a little bit more. I do think the crowd kind of riles them up a little bit, and they do end up swinging a little more, and I do think we're going to see a few more finishes than usual. Anyways, I think this is going to be a pretty fun, pretty exciting card, so without further ado, let's get right into the breakdowns. And in the first fight of the night, we have Istela Nunes versus Yazmin Jauregui, and Yazmin's the minus 335 favorite. Nunes is the plus 285 underdog, and this is honestly a great fight to start the card off. I feel like if this was under any other Fight Night card, this would potentially be a fight of the night contender, but the fact that it's the first fight on the card and that there are some other very exciting fights, this one might not make the cut. But this should be a pretty fun one between two strikers. I think these two ladies are going to get after it. It's going to be a pretty crazy fight, honestly. But we'll start with the Yazmin side first. The prohibitive favorite, as John Anik would like to say, with Yazmin. She is a very high-volume striker. She's very aggressive on the feet. She does a great job of putting combinations together. The durability checks out. She's very tough. So does the cardio. We just saw her come off of just a 3-round war with Yazmin Lucindo. So, she does seem to have a lot of tools to succeed in this division. Nunes, on the other hand, pretty solid striker herself. She does come from a Muay Thai background, I believe. I do think between the two, she's probably a slightly heavier hitter. She does sit down a lot more on her shots. I think she does incorporate the kicks a little better and a little more than Yazmin. However, she's yet to find a UFC win yet. Both of her UFC losses have been to girls that have pretty aggressively pushed the grappling against her, and it was really the takedown defense and the cardio that kind of let her down. But I feel like this fight is a little different. I think it's a completely different stylistic matchup from Carnelossi and Sam Hughes. I do think that in a 3-round striking affair, I think that the cardio of Nunes is going to hold up a bit better. Nunes is finally going to get the fight she wants, and of course, so will Yazmin. I do think that both of these girls are going to throw hands. I really don't think there's going to be too much wrestling or grappling in this matchup. And so in what I feel like should be a striking affair, I feel like it's going to be a pretty competitive fight. You kind of have to favor Yazmin a little bit just because she's shown, pretty good output in cardio, but I just don't see how you could make Yazmin more than a 2-1 favorite here. And even then, I feel like that's being very, very generous on the Yazmin side. I know Nunes hasn't looked particularly great during her UFC run, but she was winning a lot of the striking exchanges. Really, it's just a completely different stylistic matchup here. And for as great as Yazmin looked in her previous fight, we do have to remember that Lucindo is more of a grappler. At least from what I've seen on the tape going into that fight, Lucindo, someone who's generally pretty aggressively pushing the grappling, getting on top of opponents, clinching up with them. But in that fight, it was pretty much just a striking affair. And even then, Lucindo was able to land some pretty big shots on Yazmin. I believe she even won a round off Yazmin as well. And honestly, I think Nunes is just a much better striker than Lucindo, and is a much better striker than anyone Yazmin has faced to date. And overall, I just feel like this is going to be a very, very close fight. I think it's going to be very back and forth. And between the two, I actually feel like Nunes is the slightly heavier hitter. I feel like she's going to land some of the bigger, more impactful shots, the more eye-catching shots. And for that reason, I'm actually going to pick Nunes to win the fight here outright. I think this line is just completely off here. I know Nunes hasn't looked great, but how it's lined now would suggest that Yazmin's going to go in there and just completely dominate Nunes, which I really don't see happening. I think this is a very, very competitive fight. So I'll go with Nunes here to win a very close and maybe controversial decision here. But yeah, give me Nunes here to pull off the upset and get her first UFC win. And in the next fight, we have Francis Marshall versus Marcelo Rojo. And Marshall's the minus 170 favorite. Rojo's the plus 150 underdog. And we'll start with Marshall, who's a Contender Series guy. Put on a real gutsy performance on the Contender Series. He was hitting takedowns. He was landing big shots, and he was able to go the distance there in a very gritty sort of fight. But the issue with Marshall is that he is still very untested. He went to war in his last fight, but overall, the quality of competition just really isn't there. I feel like maybe his best win is Matthews, his Contender Series opponent. But if you look into it a little bit more, Matthews is a 5-0 fighter who is a round one finisher. I don't think any of his fights have gone past that first round. All of his wins are against pretty low-level guys as well. But if you're watching that fight, you'd see that Matthews completely gassed after that first round. He wasn't really able to do much. Marshall was just kind of able to land at will. He was able to hit takedowns at will. It was a good performance by Marshall, but the level of competition just is not there. And, you do have to be a little wary of guys who are looking good against lower-level guys. Whereas Rojo, on the other hand, I'd say he's definitely a lot more proven. He's, I'd say, more of an upper-end regional guy. I don't know if he's necessarily UFC caliber, but, he has been in there with some pretty good guys. He has been finished a lot, so, that is worth noting. But it is against, I'd say, pretty legit guys. Guys like Charles Jourdain, guys like Kyler Phillips, legit guys, right? And even on the regionals, he's got a loss to John Castaneda in the third round, which, Castaneda's off in the UFC as well. But Rojo, he is a pretty aggressive, pretty heavy-handed guy who does seem to have some power in his hands. He will kind of make it a dogfight in there. He was landing some pretty heavy shots on Castaneda. He was landing some pretty big shots on Jourdain as well. At the end of the day, he did lose in the third round against those guys. He is someone who absolutely can get broken in a high-paced fight, especially if there's grappling involved. So, stylistically, this does seem like it could be a tough fight for Rojo. We did see Marshall push a pretty insane grappling pace on the Contender Series. He was able to get a lot of top time, was able to kind of smash his opponent. So, in theory, this should be a pretty tough matchup for Rojo. But I feel like the levels and the experience could be a bit of an equalizer here. And, beyond that, I just think that Rojo is the better striker anyways. I feel like he is the more dangerous fighter on the feet. And lastly, I will say this. I know the Contender Series fades a pretty big narrative, but, I think it is somewhat legit. We've seen a lot of these guys, they come in and they just don't perform the way we expect them to perform. I think a great example, a recent example actually, is Zellhuber. Obviously, he was supposed to just go in there and run through Trey Ogden, right? Trey Ogden, a guy who's losing minutes on the feet against Jordan Levitt. And then we have a tall, rangy, high-paced striker in Zellhuber who just completely shit the bed in that fight. Goes in there and looks terrible, doesn't really throw, and it ends up losing a pretty decisive 30-27 decision. And even a little further back, I do remember Jake Hadley. He looked pretty good on the Contender Series. He looked good on the regionals. Just comes in and gets completely out-grappled. Is able to bounce back, but, something about that first fight in the UFC, being under the bright lights, maybe, that first fight week for them, it's just a little more difficult. So, a lot of times we see these guys just not be able to perform to their potential, and, that definitely could be the case here. But regardless, this is going to be a massive step up in competition for him anyways. So yeah, it's kind of hard for me to really trust Marshall here, even though stylistically he should have some advantages. But Rojo, I do think is a pretty dangerous guy in the first 7-8 minutes or so of a fight as well. So, I wouldn't be surprised if Rojo got an early knockout, or if he wins the first round and is able to maybe do enough that second round to win a decision as well and not get finished. I think is pretty live. So I'm going to go with Rojo here. I just am not completely sold on Marshall yet. I'd have to see him perform a little more against, more experienced opponents, guys who are a little more proven before, I buy in on this guy. So official pick, I'm going to go with Rojo, and I guess I'll just go with Rojo to win by round 1 knockout. And next up, we have Natan Levy versus Genaro Valdéz, and Levy's the minus 185 favorite. Valdéz is the plus 160 underdog, and this is a pretty interesting fight, kind of a tricky one if I'm being honest, because with Valdéz, from a technical standpoint, I'm not really sure what he does well, but from what I have seen, it does look like he's got some intangibles in that, he is someone who's very aggressive. He's the definition of a scrapper, right? Someone who's going to look to push a pretty crazy pace in there. He's willing to brawl and exchange with opponents in the pocket. He's very tough, very gritty. Makes him damn near impossible to bet, as a favorite, but as an underdog, he is interesting because, he does have a penchant of getting into these, 50-50 exchanges, which, really could go either way, right? Like against Frivola, he was swinging with Frivola, did get dropped 4 times, but kept getting back up and, just kept getting in the face of Frivola. Obviously, it didn't work out for him there. But on the Contender Series, he was getting into a crazy brawl as well, against, I believe, Patrick White. Both guys were pretty gassed, but, he was able to find the finish in the second round. So Valdéz, definitely an action fighter. I'd say he's kind of a kill-or-be-killed fighter as well. But on the other side of things, we have Levy, who is a bit more of a grappler. The striking, I think, still is a bit clunky, still a bit hittable. But, he is pretty good at hitting takedowns. He's got some nice takedowns, some nice foot sweeps. The issue is with Levy, though, is, he's just not really great at controlling guys. Against Garcia, he hit 3 takedowns, but had less than a minute of control time. And Garcia was able to reverse and, hit takedowns of his own. Against Breeden, he had 9 takedowns, but less than 4 minutes of control time. And on top of that, despite hitting 9 takedowns against Breeden, he still absorbed over 100 significant strikes. So, in theory, Levy could just come in here and spam takedowns and win a decision this way, or maybe even get the finish. But I'm not entirely convinced that he could take Valdéz and hold him down. And I do think that Valdéz on the feet is going to be able to land some pretty big shots. The cardio is definitely a concern on the Valdéz side. The guy pushes in insane pace. He's completely gassed out in the Patrick White fight, but since it was such a crazy fight, his opponent was pretty gassed as well, which leads me to believe that we see Levy potentially slow down in this fight as well. Levy, I don't think has got phenomenal cardio either, right? He did win a pretty gritty decision against Breeden, but against both Garcia and Breeden, he did drop the last round. And against Breeden, he was kind of getting lit up in that last round as well. And I feel like Valdéz does actually hit a bit harder than both of these guys. So if Levy isn't able to put Valdéz away in the first 2 rounds, I could definitely see Valdéz landing some pretty heavy shots later in the fight. Obviously, there still are some pretty big question marks as to the takedown defense and the get-ups of Valdéz. And of course, there's the potential cardio concerns from Valdéz as well. But I also think that part of it's because Valdéz is just pushing a pace that he can't really maintain. Looking at some of his regional bouts, it does look like he's gotten some finishes in the second and third round. So I don't think he's just a complete gas or anything. I just think he pushes a pretty crazy pace here. And really, my concern on the Levy end here is that I just think Levy's way too hittable on the feet. I think he gets a little reckless sometimes as well. I've seen him hurt pretty badly on the regionals. And if he isn't able to just consolidate control in this fight, he could be in a bit of trouble here. But at the end of the day, I do think I have to slightly lean Levy here. Not super thrilled about it, but at the end of the day, Levy is someone who does have a path in the wrestling. We have seen him go 3 rounds before, whereas with Valdéz, we haven't. But I do think that Valdéz is dangerous enough on the feet to potentially give Levy some troubles here, though. So, official pick for this fight, I'll go with Levy to win by round 3 submission. Like I was saying earlier, I do feel that Valdéz is a bit of a kill-or-be-killed fighter. I feel like Valdéz definitely is live for a knockout early. And I can see him kind of pursuing it a little too aggressively and maybe gassing himself out and leaving himself vulnerable later in a fight. So I do think that there's a good chance somebody gets finished in this fight. But official pick, I guess I'll go with Levy to win by round 3 submission. And next up, we have Tracy Cortez versus Amanda Ribas. And Ribas is the minus 120 favorite. Cortez is the plus 100 underdog. So a pretty interesting fight here. We have a women's strawweight bout. This will be Ribas's second fight at this weight class. And it is against Cortez, who is a pretty good wrestler, right? Someone who is very strong on top, very good at, taking opponents down, controlling them there. She's shown some pretty good submission defense as well, has looked pretty good in scrambles, has honestly looked pretty dominant in her UFC run so far, undefeated, and has been able to just rack up control time against some pretty big and pretty strong opponents, decent competition as well, has largely been able to impose her game plan against her opponents. But she is going up against a very skilled, a very well-rounded fighter in Ribas. Ribas, more of a grappler, but, on the feet, she has actually got pretty decent volume, pretty good output. And again, on the mat, she's, a black belt in jiu-jitsu. She's got some nice hip tosses, some nice takedowns as well. Could backfire here, potentially, right? She could get her back taken by Cortez, who is a pretty competent grappler herself. So this is a pretty interesting fight, right? Early I was actually kind of leaning Ribas. I feel like she's just the more well-rounded fighter. She's going to be, I think, winning the minutes on the feet. She's got some takedown upside as well. She should be able to offer some resistance in terms of the defensive grappling. Ribas, pretty good takedown defense. She may be able to out-scramble Cortez as well. However, the more I think about it, the more I feel like the size and the physicality could be a big factor here. Ribas, she's a pretty skilled fighter, but I feel like she's a pretty average-sized 115er, and moving up to 125, the size and the physicality could be an issue because we have seen Cortez take down and control much bigger, stronger women in Gato and in Egger. I do think that Ribas is a little more skilled than these fighters, but if these two do end up tangling up, and I do think there's a good chance that they do. I think the physicality could just be a big advantage here for Cortez, right? I can see Cortez maybe just being able to muscle her way through some of these positions. And I do also want to mention that Ribas did actually get taken down and held down by Jandiroba. Jandiroba kind of gassed after that first round and wasn't really able to convert any more takedowns, but I do find that a little concerning as well, especially against Cortez, who can push the wrestling hard for 3 rounds. If Jandiroba was able to have 1 round of grappling and wrestling success against you, there's a chance Cortez could have 2, maybe even 3. So I'm definitely rethinking my position here on Ribas, but I think I'll still pick her to win here. Definitely not as confident as I was initially. I would like to see the weigh-ins for this one, but ultimately, for this matchup, I do think that we see Ribas maybe keep it standing long enough and do enough on the feet to win a pretty close decision. I think Ribas has some, potential takedown upside as well. The main concern really is just Cortez taking Ribas down and laying on top of her, but I'm going to trust that her takedown defense and get-ups hold up here, and that she'll pull off a pretty competitive decision win here. And in the next fight, we have Jonathan Pearce versus Darren Elkins, and Pearce is the minus 450 favorite. Elkins is the plus 350 underdog, and this is a pretty interesting matchup here. Two guys who kind of want to do the same thing. Obviously, Elkins, the much more tested fighter, but also a bit older, and also has accumulated just a lot more wear and tear. Both guys, I think, are pretty hittable on the feet, but both are pretty reliable to hit takedowns. Both have great cardio and can push a pretty heavy grappling pace. I don't think either guy's got exceptional takedown defense, but I think it's partly because, both guys are a bit more comfortable on the ground, so they're a little more willing to take the fight there. Between the two, though, I'd say Elkins is probably the one who's a little more comfortable on the feet. We have seen Elkins, go 15 minutes in a striking fight before, whereas with JSP, he's generally a lot more reliable to push the wrestling and the grappling a lot more aggressively. But ultimately, what I think it comes down to in this fight is going to be the youth and physicality of JSP. I think Elkins overall is maybe the better grappler, but obviously he's way past his prime, and he has taken a lot of damage over the years. JSP, on the other hand, is going to be in his prime. He's going to be the bigger guy, actually, by a decent margin in this matchup. So I feel like he should be able to maybe get the better of Elkins in some of these grappling exchanges, maybe just muscle his way into a more dominant position. And JSP's got fantastic cardio as well, so he should really be able to match the pace of Elkins. So I do think that JSP's the deserved favorite here, but minus 450 does seem, it honestly seems like it's getting a little out of hand here. Elkins is a pretty respectable wrestler himself, and I don't think that JSP's a massive threat on the feet either. So, I don't think he's knocking Elkins out here. Guys like Christian Rodriguez and Amirkhani did have some success on the mat against JSP. It wouldn't be completely shocking if Elkins did either, but on the other side of things, Elkins, he has been put on his back before. He has been controlled. Guys like Minner and Bektic have had, pretty good success there. The issue with those guys are that they're kind of gassers, especially on the Amirkhani or the Minner end. Kind of the same with Bektic. Bektic kind of known for being a bit of a choker. JSP, pretty unlikely to gas here. JSP has shown, phenomenal cardio and output. So, I don't really see him gassing out and getting finished like those other two guys there. But on the other side of things, I don't think this is going to be a complete domination like the line would suggest. I do think that Elkins may have some moments here. I wouldn't be surprised if Elkins is able to hit some takedowns of his own, but ultimately I do have to go with the younger fighter here. The line's just a little ridiculous, but I do have to side with JSP here to pick up the win, likely by decision. I don't see him submitting or, just completely outpacing Elkins either, man. Elkins is kind of a dog in there, so I'll go with JSP to win by decision. And next up, we have Marc Diakiese versus Michael Johnson, and Diakiese's the minus 285 favorite. Johnson's the plus 245 underdog. Johnson obviously known more for his quick hands and his boxing, and I feel like even at this age he still seems pretty quick, and offensively I do think he's still quite potent of a striker. Obviously he's been in there with some of the best guys, but was just never really able to realize his potential in there. He's definitely had some blunders in terms of the losses, but he's beaten some pretty respectable guys as well. He's gotten a pretty salty record, but I don't think he's super washed or anything. And I feel like he still is pretty good offensively. He's just kind of had some lapses that have led to some pretty stupid losses, like the last-minute knockout loss to Emmett, the Moises heel hook, very close to decision, loss to Stevie Ray and to Malarkey as well. But overall, I don't think that Johnson's completely past it or anything. I feel like he is still a pretty solid fighter. He's just kind of found ways to fumble it in a number of his losses. And he's going up against Diakiese, who has really looked to push the wrestling lately. It seems with his job on the line, he's decided to play it a bit more safe, right? Kind of abuse his physicality and his cardio. Just go out there, spam takedowns, and look to grind out opponents. And he's had a lot of success with it lately, 2-fight winning streak. But the fact of the matter is, it was against, Hadzovic and Borshev, two guys with pretty horrendous takedown defense, guys with pretty subpar cardio as well. And, Borshev, he's a pretty good striker, but, still very, very untested in the grappling realm. And as it turns out, it might be something that is going to be abused going forward by future opponents. Hadzovic, historically pretty bad takedown defense as well. Also an aging and, kind of a washed fighter, if I'm being honest. But taking a look at this matchup, I feel like it is still a potential path to victory here for Diakiese. The only thing is, Johnson does actually have pretty solid takedown defense, so he definitely is going to be able to offer a lot more resistance as opposed to guys like Hadzovic and Borshev. And I do think that Johnson's a bit more dangerous on the feet than both of these guys. Definitely more so than Hadzovic. Borshev, again, is a pretty good striker, but he hasn't quite proven how dangerous he is at this level, whereas Michael Johnson has. However, with Johnson, while he does have pretty good takedown defense, if you are able to take him down, you can actually have a decent amount of success, on top of him. So I feel like if Diakiese is able to really push the wrestling and be persistent with it, chain the takedowns together and not let up, he can definitely have success, because I feel like if he is able to hit a takedown early against Johnson, it can kind of snowball from there. I feel like the takedowns will start to come a little easier, later in the fight, especially if Diakiese's really making Johnson work, on the takedown defense and on the get-up. So I feel like between the two, the cardio on the Diakiese end's a little better, and I can see him having more success later in the fight if he's pushing the wrestling heavily. But the thing is, he really is going to have to commit to the wrestling here, and I feel like he will, but it's kind of hard to say. You never know what these guys' game plans are coming into fights, and he's going to face a lot more resistance here in this fight. And now that he's on a 2-fight winning streak, I feel like Diakiese may not be as desperate to go for the takedowns. So that is a little concerning on my end, but again, we're making a lot of assumptions here, but I feel like if Diakiese does pursue the wrestling heavily, he should be able to look like a decent sized favorite here. However, it could get pretty interesting if he isn't able to convert the takedowns. I do think Johnson's the better striker. Diakiese's got some pretty potent leg kicks, but I don't know how much success he's going to have in prolonged striking exchanges. So I really do think Diakiese's going to have to push the wrestling here. I think he's going to have success here with it, so I'll go with Diakiese here to win by decision. I think he's going to pull off another, pretty dominant but boring decision here. So, give me Diakiese to win by decision. And next up, we have Scott Holtzman versus Clay Guida. Pretty good matchup here, if I'm being honest. I do like when the UFC matches up some of these aging fighters. Anyways, Holtzman's the -150 favorite. Guida's the +130 underdog. And we'll start with Holtzman first, who is coming off of a somewhat long layoff. It's been about a year and a half since he's fought. But with Holtzman, he is a pretty well-rounded fighter, someone who could do a bit of everything, pretty meat and potatoes on the feet. Does seem to have a little bit of power. He does seem to load up a bit sometimes when he's striking. He's capable of mixing in the wrestling as well, but he's kind of susceptible to being taken down himself. We saw Nick Lentz have a bit of success there. We saw Drew Dober have success there a long time ago. Granted, it was like 5-6 years ago, and Dober was hitting the same trip over and over against Holtzman. And so, I do think that Holtzman may have kind of shored that up a bit over the years, but not a particularly great look since he is going up against Guida, who is a pretty solid wrestler himself. On the feet, Guida is... he's kind of a weasel, honestly. He throws a lot out there, but, there isn't a lot landing, and he's not landing with a ton of power either. But in terms of the optics, it does look like he's pretty active, even if he isn't landing a ton of the shots. So he definitely can trick some of the judges into thinking, he's landing a bit more than he does, but he does have the wrestling to fall back to. And at 40 years old, he can still push a pretty solid wrestling pace. And on top of that, he's been pretty active this past year and a half. I think since Holtzman's last fight, Guida's had, 3 or 4 fights already. And, he hasn't looked completely terrible outside of Santos almost finishing him. But, he did show a lot of grit in that fight and was able to come back. So I do kind of like Clay in this spot. I kind of feel this is a kind of a 50-50 fight, if I'm being honest, especially if Clay is pushing the wrestling. If it's a 15-minute striking affair, I can kind of see Holtzman pulling away, but I do think that Clay will mix in the wrestling, and I do think he's going to have some success there. And honestly, I just don't really know how Holtzman's going to look coming back off of a longish layoff, 2 knockouts. And he's 39 years old himself, so, he's not that much younger than Clay. So it's kind of hard to know what kind of shape he's coming in. But, even if there isn't a ton of regression on the Holtzman side, I can still see this being a very competitive fight. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Clay here. I think he's going to be able to weasel his way through some of the striking exchanges and then mix in the wrestling to kind of seal the deal. So I'll take Clay to win by a pretty competitive 29-28 decision. And in the next fight, we have Emily Ducote versus Angela Hill, and Ducote's the -125 favorite. Hill's the +105 underdog, and I feel like this is a pretty straightforward fight. It should be a pretty back and forth one between 2 strikers. Ducote, more of a boxer, very technical on the feet. She's coming off of a pretty clean performance against Penne. I feel like it was a 30-27 performance. I know a couple of the judges, scored at 29-28. Not really sure how, but I felt like Ducote won that one pretty clearly. But it is worth noting, though, that Penne is primarily a grappler, and Penne really just did not have any sort of answers for the leg kicks. Ducote was able to just get off on them at will and kind of just stay safe throwing the leg kicks, throwing the jab. And while it was a pretty clean performance, pretty dominant performance, I don't see that being very translatable here. She's going up against Hill, who is a pretty good striker, definitely a better striker than Penne. Hill's got pretty good Muay Thai. She's got, much better footwork and volume than I think any of the opponents that Ducote's fought. Hill's also pretty strong in the clinch. She is getting a little up there in age, but hasn't really shown too many signs of regression. She's still looked pretty good in her recent fights. Fought very competitively against Lemos, a performance that is honestly aged pretty well. Was able to pull off a victory against Godinez as well. On top of that, Hill is pretty tough. She's never been finished. She can throw volume. She can set a pace. Overall, she is a pretty solid fighter who really only struggles against grapplers, right? So I don't think that's going to be an issue here. I feel like we're going to get a striking affair. I think both girls are going to give each other the fight they want. But on the other side of things, Ducote is going to be taking a pretty big step up in competition. I feel like Ducote overall still is somewhat unproven. And I feel like just stylistically, this is going to be a very competitive fight. I don't really see either fighter really being able to pull away. But as far as a pick goes, I got to go with Hill here. Again, I just don't think that Ducote's really faced anyone with the same sort of pace and pressure that Hill will bring. I think Hill is by far the best striker that Ducote's faced to date. I also think that Hill's going to have a little more volume on the feet as well. The numbers I think are a little skewed for Penne, just because not Penne, but Ducote, just because of the Penne fight. She was just getting off on the leg kicks with impunity. I don't think that's going to happen here. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Hill here to pull off the slight upset. I'm just going with the slightly more proven fighter in Hill. I think she's still got a bit more left in the tank, and I don't think Ducote's some world beater or anything. So I'm going to go with Hill here to win by a pretty close decision. But now, as I'm saying that, this definitely has the makings of another very close, Hill split decision loss. But I'm going to stick with the Hill pick here. I feel like this is definitely kind of a prove-it spot for Ducote. And I do think Hill's going to be a pretty good test for her. But official pick, I'll go with Hill to win by split decision. And next up, we have Phil Rowe versus Niko Price. And Price is the minus 140 favorite. Rowe's the plus 120 underdog. And I think this potentially could be a very exciting fight. I feel like the UFC probably feels the same way as well, putting these guys, or making these guys the featured prelim bout. Niko Price usually brings it. Rowe's usually, in pretty fun fights as well. I think he's had 2 of his 3 fights finish at the UFC level. But in any case, it's going to be a striking affair most likely. I think these guys are going to swing, and I think it's going to be a pretty fun fight. But we'll start with Rowe first, who, Rowe's a guy who I feel like, I still have some question marks, about. I feel like, his UFC wins actually haven't been all that great, even though he has gotten a couple of finishes. His wins have been over Ryan Koski and Jason Witt, a couple of guys who, don't have the best cardio, a couple of guys who may not have the best chins either. And on the regionals, I'm looking through his record, and I don't think he's really beaten anyone of note either on that end. But from what we have seen so far, Rowe is someone who does struggle a bit with the takedown defense, but he has found a way to work his way back up and back into a fight. He does seem to have some power in his hands as well. But again, it is worth mentioning here again that, it has been against guys who are a little chinny and guys who are a little gassy as well. And he is going to be going up against a fighter in Price who is a completely different stylistic matchup from guys like Koski and Witt. Price, he's a bit of an action fighter himself, someone who does like to move forward and pressure opponents. Someone who's, a little hittable, but he is willing to exchange in the pocket and just make it a dogfight. Price, he has been chinned a few times, but it is against some pretty heavy-handed guys. Guys like Alisson, guys like Luque twice. Once it was a doctor stoppage, but, he has been hurt pretty badly by Luque. Took a lot of damage from him. Got knocked out by Neal as well. And Rowe, while he does have some power, I'm not sure if it's quite at that level. But with the way Price fights, I feel like Rowe's definitely going to have opportunities to land some big shots. But official pick for this fight, I think I'm leaning more towards Price, just because I feel like Rowe does tend to struggle a bit against pressure. He can get put on the back foot. He can kind of get overwhelmed a little bit and even let opponents kind of dictate the pace. Green, I think, had a lot of success just kind of pressuring him, backing him down. And to an extent, even Shabazian on the Contenders series did a bit. The issue with some of these guys that has lost to Rowe is, they don't have great cardio like, Shabazian. Obviously, the guys, Leon Shabazian, that is, I think the brother of Edmund, not too much disparity in terms of the cardio between the two. And even someone like Koski, pretty subpar cardio and with, of course, very, very bad chin on that guy. Price, on the other hand, is going to be a much more dangerous matchup than any of Rowe's previous opponents. I don't think that, Witt or Koski or even Green is as dangerous as Price on the feet. And we do know that Price is going to look to pressure in there and get in the face of Rowe. The concern is, these guys are going to start swinging and maybe something gets through and Price gets clipped. But by the same token, Rowe has been clipped before. He did get knocked down on the Contender Series by Leon Shabazian. He did get knocked down twice by Gabe Green as well. So I feel like in a firefight, we could see, either guy get clipped and go down here. Obviously, Price has accumulated way more wear and tear, but, I don't think that Rowe's got a fantastic chin either. And like I was saying before, I do think that Price is pretty heavy-handed himself. On top of that, I do think that Price, may have a little takedown upside. He's not someone who's going to aggressively shoot takedowns, but we did see him go to it a little bit in his most recent fight, and, he has mixed it in once in a while here. So I feel like that is potentially a path here, seeing as how Rowe is pretty bad takedown defense. So I do like Price in this spot here. I think there are a few paths to victory, but I think I'll go with Price to win by round one knockout. I think these guys are going to get after it early, and I feel like Niko might be the one to land the heavier and cleaner shot early, but I actually kind of like the under a little bit more in this fight. I think they're going to oblige each other in the striking exchanges, and I do think that someone is likely going down. I'm thinking it's Rowe here. So official pick, I'll go with Niko Price to win by round one knockout. And next up, we have Cal Daukaus versus Eryk Anders, and Daukaus is the minus 200 favorite. Anders is the plus 170 underdog, and we'll start with Daukaus first, who I feel like has had a pretty disappointing UFC run, if I'm being honest. Daukaus, I feel like is someone who's a pretty skilled fighter, very well-rounded, good grappling. He could box as well. He's got decent wrestling. He's decent against the cage, in the clinch. But it just seems like he hasn't really been able to put it all together. And I think I may have figured out why. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree. But I just think that Daukaus kind of lacks the athleticism to really impose his game plan. You look at his wins. They're over guys like Dustin Stoltzfus and Jamie Pickett, two guys who are not very skilled or athletic. And you go and look at some of his losses to guys like Haas and Dolidze, too. I'd say pretty strong physical guys. Against Haas, he kind of just gets top-timed in that fight. Wasn't able to hit any of his takedowns. Haas, obviously, fantastic wrestler with really good takedown defense, but Daukaus wasn't really able to get any respect on the feet either. Daukaus, he does actually have, decent boxing, but it just doesn't seem like he's really got the power to make opponents really respect him. He's a good enough grappler, but, I feel like maybe he just doesn't have some of the physicality to finish some of these takedowns. We saw Dolidze kind of just handle him in the clinch a bit before landing that, mean knee to the face. And so I feel like that might just be bottlenecking Daukaus' game a little bit here. But I think what makes this fight so interesting is that, we have Anders, who is, I'd say, a pretty good athlete, but not particularly skilled, which definitely puts him in better standing than, say, like a Pickett or a Stoltzfus, right? But, from a technical standpoint, I do think that Daukaus is just a little better everywhere. It's just that Anders, he is a pretty big, pretty strong physical guy, and he has been able to get wins, landing pretty heavy shots, bullying opponents in the clinch, taking them down and kind of just grinding them out there. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if we just see Anders kind of clinch up with Daukaus, kind of just hold him against the cage, maybe land some big shots in between, maybe hit a takedown, and just win a very sloppy, very, grindy sort of fight. And honestly, I just don't know if Daukaus could really be trusted as a a significant favorite here. I think he routinely comes in as a pretty big favorite, and he's routinely kind of dropped the ball. I've actually picked him in all of his fights to win, and I think my overall record's like 2-1 or 2-3-1 or something like that. But I think I'm hopping off the train here. I feel like even though Daukaus, he is technically better everywhere, I just have kind of a hard time seeing him implementing the game plan that he wants to fight here, right? I feel like for Daukaus to look like a minus 200 favorite, he's going to have to get the grappling going. He's going to have to get on top of Anders, maybe submit him or at least get significant top time against him. But Anders, he has got pretty good takedown defense, and if he's able to keep this fight standing, I kind of have a hard time seeing Daukaus win the striking exchanges cleanly. I can see Anders just landing some of the bigger shots on the feet, even though Daukaus technically may have the crisper boxing. I just think that Anders, the physical tools that he has is potentially enough for him to win the fight here. So I'm going to go with Anders to win by decision probably. I think he's going to have to make this a very grindy sort of fight, which we have seen him do before. So yeah, I'll go with Anders here to win by decision. I think we see him just kind of bully Daukaus a little bit in the clinch, and maybe hit some takedowns as well to kind of seal the deal. So give me Anders by decision. And next up, we have Jack Hermansson versus Roman Dolidze, and Hermansson's the minus 140 favorite. Dolidze's the plus 120 underdog, and this fight did only just get announced, like I think a day or two ago. Hermansson initially slated to go up against Brunson, but I think Brunson's pulled out, and Dolidze is coming in short notice for this fight. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I just don't think that Dolidze's really all that good, if I'm being honest. I think the guy is a bit of a meme fighter. He's got some power on the feet. He's got some sneaky heel hooks, but I kind of doubt that he's going to be heel hooking Hermansson here. I did warn people about Phil Hawes. I had some doubts as to the heel hook defensive Hawes, and lo and behold, he goes out there and gets his leg completely shredded and then brutally knocked out. Dolidze definitely could land something big here, but he's definitely not heel hooking Hermansson. Hermansson, a very good submission grappler himself, but lately is kind of stuck to a more striking heavy point fighting style. I think it was around the Souza fight where he really just kind of abandoned the grappling, right? He did have that win over Gastelum, but since then he's largely just been in striking affairs. Has lost a few fights to some of the better strikers in the division, but he can, as we've seen in the Curtis fight, beat some of the more middling level strikers. But on the feet, Hermansson does actually have pretty damn good volume. Not the most power or anything, but he does have pretty good lateral movement. He does a good job of, staying busy, working the kicks. And even against some of these other guys like Vettori and Sean Strickland, he wasn't getting completely blown out of the water. He's landing some decent shots himself. It's just that I feel like the power dynamic's just not really there for Hermansson. He could touch you up, for 3-5 rounds, but I just don't think he's got a ton of power or a ton of, finishing upside on the feet. And of course, it is worth mentioning, guys like, Vettori, Strickland, legit top 5 guys in the division. And of course, Hermansson does have the grappling to fall back on. He hasn't gone to it too much lately, but he is a pretty dangerous, submission grappler himself. But taking a look at this matchup, Dolidze may be the more explosive guy. Maybe, he's got a bit more raw power, but I kind of struggle to see him winning here outside of, landing a crazy shot on the feet. I just don't see Dolidze being able to outwork Hermansson standing. I don't think he's going to outgrind Hermansson in the clinch either. Again, he's not heel hooking Hermansson, so, I feel like his only path here is to land something big. So, minus 140 for Hermansson, I feel like is a steal here. I feel like Hermansson should be closer to like minus 200 if I'm being honest. Like, just looking back at some of Dolidze's previous opponents and how he's lined, right? Dolidze was a plus 150 underdog to Phil Hawes and a plus 200 underdog to Cal Daukaus. And now he's only plus 120 here against Hermansson, who is a legit top 10 guy, a guy who's been in there with some of the best guys in the division. And yet he's still a smaller underdog than he was to, lower level guys like Hawes and, Daukaus. Honestly, I just don't see too many paths to victory here for Dolidze. Maybe he's able to land another meme knee to the face, but I don't think that's super likely. I don't think he's heel hooking Hermansson. On the feet, I see Hermansson just being able to outwork and outstrike Dolidze. I don't think Dolidze is going to be able to grind his way to a very sloppy decision like he did against Staropoli and John Alon. So I got to go with Hermansson here, man. I feel like Hermansson can definitely just outwork and out-hustle Dolidze. And, if Dolidze tries that heel hook cheese, I feel like we're going to see Hermansson just get on top of Dolidze and just smash him there. So I'm going to go with Hermansson here to win by decision. I feel like Dolidze's pretty much knockout or bust here. So give me Hermansson to win by decision. And next up, we have a heavyweight bout between Sergei Pavlovich and Tuivasa. Pavlovich is the minus 170 favorite. Tuivasa is the plus 140 underdog. And it definitely feels like the UFC's kind of doing Tai a little dirty here. I think they probably could have put him on the Perth card and, fed him some bum, get the train rolling again with Tuivasa. But it seems like they're trying to get the hype on Pavlovich rolling instead, give him a bit of that shine because, Pavlovich, he is carrying some momentum in this fight. He is on a 4-fight win streak, all by knockout in the first round. So the guy is definitely riding some hype going into this fight, and, rightfully so. Pavlovich, very big guy, an absolute unit at heavyweight, lots of power in his hands, very aggressive. All of his UFC fights have ended in the first round. I believe all but 2 of his fights overall have ended in the first round. So, this guy is an absolute juggernaut when he's moving forward. But, it is worth noting he might be someone who wilts under pressure. Obviously, we only have the Overeem fight to work off of, but, that was his debut fight against a grizzled vet. However, outside of that, he hasn't faced a ton of adversity, which does leave me, worried a little bit here. Tuivasa, he has been through a ton of adversity. He's dished out a ton of adversity. He's a very tough guy. I know he's got a pretty dangerous kicking game. He's got power in his hands. And he is willing to, bite down on the mouthpiece and trade with you. His chin's kind of bailed him out. He's taken a ton of damage going into this fight, which is probably going to be a pretty big talking point here. He takes a ton of damage in most of his fights, but that last fight, he's taken a lot of body shots. He's taken a lot of, head shots as well. Derek Lewis also had him on skates. And even though Tai, he does have power in his hands and, he could absolutely catch Pavlovich, I just think that between the two, Pavlovich is the significantly, heavier hitter. His chin definitely not as tested as Tuivasa, but it also means he hasn't taken nearly as much damage as Tuivasa either. And Tuivasa is actually making a pretty quick turnaround after the beating that Cyril put on him. Obviously, you can't write Tuivasa off here. He's shown he could, win in some of these swinging exchanges, but, I just think that Pavlovich is, so much more that he's working with here. Obviously, I think he's just the way more physical guy. The guy's just beyond jacked. He's the much taller and longer guy as well, and I suspect his chin's going to be a little more intact on top of that. So yeah, I think that there's a good chance we see Pavlovich get the round 1 knockout here. I am actually rooting for Tai, but I feel like this is going to be a pretty brutal matchup for him. I do like the unders in this fight. It looks like it got completely steamed though. But yeah, I do think someone's going down. Pavlovich, all but 2 of his fights have ended in the first round. So, the way Tuivasa fights, the way Pavlovich fights, I feel like this is going to be a car crash. I think we're going to see these guys swing pretty early in the fight, and I do think someone's getting put out, likely in the first round. And unfortunately, I do think it's going to be Tai. So, official pick for me in this fight, I'm going to go with Pavlovich to win by round 1 knockout. And next up, we have Matheus Nicolau versus Matt Schnell, and Nicolau's the minus 380 favorite. Schnell is the plus 315 underdog, and I do think this is a pretty good fight, pretty high-level fight between a couple of flyweights. So we'll start with the Nicolau side first. With Nicolau, he is a very good, very well-rounded technical fighter. He is very good defensively, very light on his feet. He's capable of mixing in the grappling, and I do think he's got some sneaky power. The only thing is, with Nicolau is he does tend to fight pretty close. I feel like most of his fights, he's kind of just doing just enough to win, which at the end of the day, he does get the victory here, and, that's got to count for something. And, I do value fighters who can win these close fights and kind of control, how the fight's going, but I feel like that is something that could potentially bite him in the ass. He does fight close enough where a few big moments could potentially swing the round. And against someone like Schnell, I feel like that is something that's potentially on the table. Schnell, very much an action fighter, right? Someone who's going to go in there and make it a dog fight. He's got some power on the feet. He's got quick hands, pretty good counterpunching, actually. He's got a pretty dangerous submission game as well. But he is very hittable, and he is willing to brawl with opponents and just put himself in the fire. And he has had some pretty mixed results with it. He is coming off of a pretty gutsy win against Sumudaerji, but there's been plenty of times he's been rocked and hurt and, finished in there as well, just because, he does leave his chin out there to be hit. But Schnell, he is a dog, and he is someone who will go out there and he will fight for your money. So, him as a dog is always a pretty intriguing look, especially with, how dangerous he is, on the feet and on the mat. But at the end of the day, I do think that Nicolau should be able to get it done here. I think Nicolau is just much better defensively than most of Schnell's opponents, and he's definitely better defensively than Schnell, right? I think Nicolau is just really good at kind of just controlling the pace of the fight, dictating the exchanges. He's able to hit takedowns when things get a little hairy for him as well. I wouldn't be completely surprised here if we see Schnell have a bit of success, and even have some moments, right? Schnell, he is pretty dangerous standing, and he does have a pretty dangerous submission game. But I just think that Nicolau is just a little too technical, right? Because as dangerous as Schnell is, I feel like he is catching some of these lower level guys, right? Like, Sumudaerji, very good technical striker, but still a pretty green fighter. And the big knock on Mudaerji going into that fight was that, his submission defense isn't that good, and all of his losses have been by submission so far. So, Schnell was able to capitalize. He's got a win over Tyson Nam, a very close split decision. I thought he won that pretty clearly, but Nam, as we know, is kind of a knockout or bust sort of guy. And then before that, he's got finishes over Jordan Espinosa, Louis Smoka, Naoki Inoue, Marco Beltran, all guys who not that good, right? So he's able to catch him. Whereas with Nicolau, I think he is a very good, very skilled, very well-rounded guy, and I think Matt Schnell is going to have a much harder time landing that big shot or catching him from some guard sub. So I got to go with Nicolau here to win by decision. He hasn't shown a lot of urgency to finish fights. But like I said before, Nicolau actually, I do think has got pretty sneaky power, and he could land something that could drop Schnell. I don't know if he's going to pursue the finish, though. Nicolau just seems like a very conservative fighter. So official pick for this fight, I'll just go with Nicolau to win by decision. And in the co-main event, we have Rafael Dos Anjos versus Brian Barberena, and RDA's the minus 550 favorite. Barberena's the plus 420 underdog, and I feel like this is a pretty straightforward breakdown. Not any hot takes or anything for this fight. I do think this is a get-right spot for RDA. I think the UFC's just kind of doing him a bit of a solid here, a bit of a repayment, if I'm being honest. RDA's been just a big company man, right? I don't think he's ever really backed down from a fight. They basically have used him as a bit of a stepping stone for all their top welterweights and top lightweights. So it seems like they're giving him a nice step down in competition, almost as a thank you, right? And so he's getting, I think, a much-deserved veteran fight. He's been fighting contenders pretty much up until this point, but they're giving him, a very winnable matchup here in Barberena, right? Barberena, a veteran himself, but honestly just not quite on that level. He's more of a volume striker, a brawler. But the levels that both guys are operating at is just completely different. Barberena's fighting very competitively against mid-lower level guys, while RDA is just out here competing with some of the best guys in the division, championship level guys, top 5, top 10 guys at welterweight, at lightweight. You look at his, recent body of work, Fiziev, Moicano, Chiesa, Lee, Edwards, Usman, the list goes on, right? Whereas Barberena, he's fighting very competitively with guys like Anthony Ivy, Darian Weeks, Jason Witt, just a night and day difference in terms of the competition. But stylistically, I think this is a pretty bad matchup for Barberena anyways. His takedown defense is subpar. His get-up's not very good either. And he's going up against a phenomenal grappler in RDA. And I feel like RDA could probably win on the feet too. I just think I think RDA is just a bit better everywhere. You can make a case for Barberena standing. He maybe is able to land something, but I honestly haven't really been impressed with what I've seen from Barberena on the feet either. Lawler was having pretty good success before he gassed out. Matt Brown was having success and was able to hit takedowns as well. Same with Darian Weeks. And, even Jason Witt. Witt was able to repeatedly take him down and even knock him down. So, just very uninspiring performances, if I'm being honest. And it's against, I'd say, pretty washed fighters, pretty green fighters as well. And I just got to go back to RDA's performances, and, he's looking pretty good against Fiziev before, getting knocked out late. He put on a really good performance against Moicano, a performance that's aging pretty well. Granted, Moicano did come in short notice, and that was a 5-rounder. It was a tough fight for him, but I just think that RDA still got a bit more in the tank. I honestly think Barberena is a little more washed between the two, and I just think RDA is the better fighter pretty much everywhere. I think he could potentially just have his way on the mat as well with Barberena. I think the submission is live. I think the decision's kind of live too. It's kind of hard to say how aggressively RDA is gonna approach this fight. I feel like if you really wanted to, he could kind of do some damage on top, right? So official pick, I'll go with RDA. I'll pick him to win by round 2 submission. And in the main event, we have Kevin Holland versus Stephen Thompson. Pretty interesting fight here. Holland's going to be the slight favorite here at minus 115. This is pretty close to pick him, but, we have Thompson here at minus 105. Anyways, this is a pretty interesting stylistic matchup for both guys. Thompson, obviously, he's got that karate background, pretty extensive kickboxing record. The MMA striking from this guy is top-notch. Great footwork, great distance management. Very diverse striking arsenal from him. He is arguably the best striker in the division. Probably not even arguable, from a technical standpoint, he's probably the best striker in the division. But, there are some concerns, at least in terms of the age and the fact that, his grappling definitely got exposed pretty badly in his last 2 fights. And, people are going to say guys like Burns and Bilal Muhammad are good wrestlers and grapplers, right? And so, it's pretty obvious in hindsight, but at the time, it was not a very popular sentiment. I believe Wonderboy was a pretty sizable favorite in both fights. Even in the Bilal fight after Burns had kind of exposed his ground game, he still was a pretty decent-sized favorite, and I think the rationale was he should be able to outstrike these guys pretty cleanly and, use his footwork and distance management to, stay on the outside and avoid getting taken down. Obviously, that didn't happen. Burns was able to kind of just top time him, played a bit safe there, and Bilal was able to have actually a ton more success. He was able to do some damage on top, potentially could have even gotten the stoppage here. So I do feel the defensive grappling from Thompson is something that can absolutely be exploited, and I feel like it's something that's not going to be getting better anytime soon. And he is going to be going up against Holland, who is more of a striker, which is a good outlook here for Wonderboy, but I do think Holland's a pretty capable wrestler and grappler. He just doesn't really go to it aggressively, but it is a part of his game. We have seen him go to it before. We saw him attack it pretty aggressively against John Phillips, which, great idea, by the way. John Phillips, no ground game. And he did go to it against GM3, was able to kind of handle himself there, was able to stay safe and not get submitted in that fight. And most recently, he did shoot a blast double on Ontiveros so hard he broke the guy's neck. He does struggle defensively in terms of the takedown defense. He can get held down, but as far as this matchup goes, he's going to be, I think, the significantly better grappler here. And on the feet, he's a very dynamic striker, obviously not on the level of Wonderboy, but he does have a pretty effective kicking game. He does do a good job of attacking the legs. He does have some nice straight punches. He will loop some of his shots. It's not super technical or anything, but he is able to hurt guys with it. He lands some pretty big shots. He's hurting a lot of middleweights. He's knocking out guys at welterweight. So the power is definitely there. He's dangerous on the feet. He's dangerous on the mat. And I just feel that even though Wonder Boy is technically the better striker on the feet, Holland will have, I'd say, more of an advantage pretty much everywhere else. And even on the feet, Wonder Boy's going to have to deal with the length of Kevin Holland. I don't think that Thompson's faced anyone with quite the length and the reach. In his UFC run, he's going to have to deal with the power of Holland as well. Holland's thrown with heat in there, and Holland's, I think, a much different sort of striker than guys like Jeff Neal and Luque, who are going to move forward. Guys who Thompson can kind of matador in there. I don't see that from Holland. I see Holland, kind of kicking the legs, really trying to mitigate the footwork and the movement from Wonder Boy. But ultimately, I do favor Wonder Boy a little bit more on the feet. But you do have to kind of factor in the fact that Wonder Boy, he is getting a little up there in age. He does have a ton of injuries that he's dealt with. He's taken decent time off, between fights. And with the style that Wonder Boy fights in, if he's not as quick or if his timing's just not quite there, he could be in a bit of trouble against Holland, who is a pretty dangerous striker on the feet. And the fact is, it's been about 2 years now since we've seen Wonder Boy put on, a really good striking performance. And I'm not saying he's washed or he's regressed or anything, but I do think that the potential is there. Whereas with Holland, we know, he's going to be in pretty good form. And then, of course, there's just the whole grappling aspect to it. I know Holland's been saying he's not going to wrestle or grapple in this fight in a lot of interviews, but I don't know how much stock I want to place into that. I feel like it would definitely be the smart thing to do in this fight. I do think that if he wanted to, he could potentially have some success there. And I know that the grappling and the wrestling isn't really Holland's primary game plan, but I'm just going back to the Burns and the Muhammad fights, and looking back at those matchups, I believe a lot of people didn't believe that the wrestling and the grappling would be there for those guys, because Burns and Bilal, while they did kind of have those in their back pockets, it wasn't their primary game plan. Burns kind of known for being more of heavy-handed striker who's got a pretty dangerous submission game, but not really known for his wrestling. Bilal, on the other hand, more of a well-rounded guy who can mix in the wrestling, but not someone who, goes to it aggressively, at least up until that point. And both guys were able to have pretty dominant grappling performances against Wonder Boy. And I feel that if Holland does decide to go there, he can have a lot of success there as well. But even if he doesn't, I don't think it's a complete wash on the feet either. So overall, I just feel that there's far too many advantages for Holland for him to be, close to a pick 'em here. I feel like he should be closer to minus 160 to minus 180. We're dealing with a matchup where, for Holland for Wonder Boy to win, he'll have to outstrike Holland, pretty cleanly for 3 out of the 5 rounds. And, the 5-round experience, I do think favors Wonder Boy a little bit more. Holland has gone 5 rounds before, but it kind of just got bodied in those fights, kind of just got put on his back. So I don't know how much you can put into those performances, but, he does have some 5-round experience. But everything else, I kind of favor Holland. He's the much younger guy. He's the taller, longer guy. I think he's more dangerous. He's got more power on the feet. He's got a potential path in the wrestling and the grappling as well. So the pick for me is going to be Holland. I do think he's going to wrestle here. I think he's going to grapple. And if he does, I think he's going to be able to maybe even pick up the finish. So official pick, I'll go with Holland to win by round 2 submission. I think maybe he'll entertain the striking a little bit with Wonder Boy. I don't think he's going to be a complete fish out of water there. Kind of, get in the rhythm of it, make Wonder Boy think he's just going to strike with him, and then time a takedown, a little later in the fight, and find a submission or even maybe a ground and pound stoppage from there. Burns didn't really aggressively pursue the ground and pound or the submission attempts. I feel like, being the first guy to take down and control Thompson like that, he didn't want to take too many risks. So I feel like he just played it very safe in that fight. I think Belal kind of built on top of it, was able to hit takedowns and just do work on top. And I think someone like Holland, who I feel like is much more dangerous than, Belal and maybe not Burns, but, Burns wasn't really trying to finish. I do think that Holland, if he goes for it, would be able to find a finish, whether with the ground and pound or a submission. I just think that Holland's a significantly better grappler, and I do think he's maybe a little more physical than someone like Belal on the mat, but I do think the finish is pretty live on the Holland part if he's able to get on top of Thompson. So official pick, I'll go with Holland to win by round 2 submission.